Everyone to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. Good news, I'm working from my laptop and somehow figured out how to get this on YouTube from my laptop, which I usually stream it through the actual computer at the office, even on the laptop. So I'm excited that we could join all of you on laptop. We're just talking about Michael and his upcoming travels. Looking forward to hear more about those. I want to welcome everybody who's here today on Zoom. We have Michael and Arlene and Ron and Eva. So, and then we have, I think, a couple others coming in a second, plus many more on YouTube. And Michael, we're trying to find places for Michael to go on the East Coast because he's been to most of the places. Have you been to Canada on the East Coast? All right, so yes, that is awesome. Okay, so we're going to still work. Have you been to PEI? Okay. So today we are going to talk about Passover because next week we're going to be at Flossie Caffey's home. We're going to be live and, of course, online as well. So we're going to do live in person, live online. Please let Flossie know if you're planning to go. If you're coming from outside Sun City, just let me know and make sure you have a pass. So that'll be the 25th, March 25th, still at 10:30, and we'll have a little lunch afterwards. Then we have one set up already for the first week of May that's going to be at Lou Drucker's house, and we'll see if anybody wants to do it in June. As for upcoming events, of course, we've got the Seders. Those are the most important ones coming up. So please make sure to sign up. We got the, of course, women's Seder, the men's Seder, and we've got, of course, the two major Seders. So the March 28th, Saturday night at 6 is the men's Seder. Please RSV. It's a rum Seder with Caribbean food. We always pick a different type of alcohol. Even though it's Passover, we do alcohol that you cannot drink on Passover because we're doing it before Passover. The next day on the 29th is the women's Passover experience. And so please sign up for that. That's at 1:30 at Mikveh Israel. And then our first Seder is April 1st, and our second Seder is April 2nd. These are for the actual Passover holidays. Please sign up ASAP if you want to go on the first or second, because both those Seders usually sell out. So that's the first night of Passover is April 1st, second night, April 2nd. So hopefully you'll be able to come to some of those Seders. By the way, we have a chocolate Seder this Sunday at 1 o'clock as well. That'll have lunch if you're interested. So any other Seder news? Because we got a lot. Usually I'm invited to lead a Seder at a church, but I haven't been invited this year to do it. So we'll see if I am able to do that. Is everybody going to do Seder on their own with their family? Are they coming here? Michael's doing it on his own. Ron,
Yeah,
where are you doing Seder?
we're going to my granddaughter's house for the
Oh,
first,
nice.
and then my grandson is coming in from the state of Washington with his fiancee to introduce her to us.
Oh, nice.
And that'll be on the second. So we're looking forward to that.
Well, that'll be a lot of fun. I hope that goes well.
Yeah, they're getting married September 12th
Oh, coming up soon. Where are they getting married?
in the state of Washington,
Up way up
Spokane.
there. All right. I hear it's
Unfortunately,
beautiful up there.
unfortunately, I can't travel.
Yeah, but you can maybe they'll have it on Zoom for you
Well, I'm going to talk to him about that.
or YouTube, or they can record it and you can see it later. I hope that works. So awesome. So we got Passover coming up, and we're going to talk a little bit about Passover now. We were going to talk about Jews in classic literature, but we're going to wait because that's something Flossie wanted to do. And we're going to talk about Passover next week, but we'll talk about Passover this week. So Pesach, Passover, is again one of the six vital, most vital holidays in Judaism. They are considered the six holy days because they're in the Torah. So there, of course, will remind everybody all the time: Passover, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, that's 5, and then Shabbat, that's 6. So those are the 6 what we call major holidays because they're found in the Torah. Also, Rosh Chodesh is found in the Torah, but that's the new moon, but that's not uh, considered a major holiday. So we have these holidays. In the ancient world, Passover was considered the second holiest day of the year, most likely. Now, all of these holidays in the Torah are considered equal in general, but at different time periods, different ones take precedence seemingly. In ancient times, Sukkot, as we've mentioned, was probably the most important holiday because that's when you pray for rain. Passover would have been second because you pray for the rain to stop. Because in Israel, there's only two seasons, there's the rainy season, the dry season. Rainy season starts on Sukkot. Dry season starts on Passover, which is essential for knowing when to plant and harvest. I don't understand any of when you're supposed to do what for what. I just know it's important that you plant before the rainy season, or you harvest before the rainy seasons, or you plant before the dry season, or you harvest before. There's different plants that are planted at different times. Those are essential. So Pesach has always been an important holiday and has probably always been one of the most important holidays, even compared to the other major ones. Today, it is the most often performed Jewish duty of anything. It's the most popular of any Jewish holiday by far. So more people will eat matzah at a Seder, then we'll go to Yom Kippur services, then we'll celebrate Hanukkah. Then it's not more than Jews who will eat bagels, but it's more than Jews who will celebrate Hanukkah or Yom Kippur. And we'll talk a little bit about the reason for this, and that's mostly because of the Seder. Now, Seder, as we know, is the celebratory dinner we do on the first night and sometimes second night. It means order. Now, traditionally, you do it on the first night, but if you're outside Israel, you do it on the second night as well. And that has to do with the calendar. They're always afraid that you're going to, if you start the holiday late, as you might do if you weren't living in Israel and didn't hear the horns blowing, the shofar, then you needed to have an extra day. So in the diaspora, you can celebrate two Passover Seders, the first and second night. Now, what is really wonderful about the Seder is that we have actual evidence in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, that they were actually celebrating Passover through a Seder at least 2,000 years ago. So we know that our ancestors sat around and had a Seder like we have a Seder on the first night of Passover. Actually, what they did, we're not as familiar with. We know they ate matzah. We know there were different traditions, some of which we know. We know there were some traditions like the four questions, which we've seen in the Mishnah, which is incredible to know that when we ask the four questions, three of the four at least were the same, one had been changed. So our ancestors 2,000 years ago were asking the same questions on Passover as we ask today. And that's pretty amazing to know that definitively that's the truth. So for thousands of years, we know some of the traditions in the Seder have remained the same, including one, eating matzah, two, the four questions. Now, what are some of the other traditions? And then we'll go to the modern day. So for Passover through the years, traditions have been added, and many of them we continue. The four sons, which many of us say the four children, which talk about the child who doesn't know how to ask, the child who is ignorant, the child who is rebellious, and the child who is wise, although it's hard to be wise as a child. We know that they ate similar foods, such as food from the ground, some sort of greenery, some sort of bitter herbs. We don't know if it was horseradish, probably wasn't, but we know they were eating something bitter. They're probably some sort of root or vegetable. They weren't eating parsley necessarily, but it was something green because it was spring. And because it's spring, that obviously leads to greens and the egg. We know they probably had a Seder plate of a sort. We know that our ancestors probably used different plates for Passover because the same reason you want to have certain foods. There are also some really interesting traditions. For instance, I think in the Ethiopian Jewish tradition, which we know goes back 2,000 years plus, what did they do before Passover? They threw down and broke all their plates. And then they made new plates for Passover, and those were the plates they used for the whole year. Because you can use the plates after Passover for the regular meal, it's just hard to move backwards. So once the plates have been used for Passover, you can use it for regular meal. But once it's been used for regular meals, you can't use it again for Passover. So you break your plates at the end of the year, new plates for Passover, you use those plates all year long. But now they're not kosher for Passover because you've been eating bread on them, so you break them. So every year they had new dishes. I don't know if it was their parents' fine china they broke, most likely not. But of course, different traditions for different people. We have had lots of different traditions that have been added through the year, some of which have become synonymous and some which have been made into law, like putting different things on the plate, like an egg where there's no prayer, like eating matzo ball soup, which is not ordained anywhere else but in our love for matzo balls. Gefilte fish, which is not at all ordained in the Talmud. That is a fish of our ancestors who lived much later in Eastern Europe and were very poor. And so they used all the leftovers to make a fish ball, put some sort of goo on it, whatever their traditional goo was, and that was matzo balls. It is the fish of affliction, so it's perfect for Passover. Those are probably once the money was running low, you used whatever's left over from the fish, and you had fish balls because you couldn't afford any new fish. And so that became your last resort, and that became the tradition. Eating harosets we know is ancient, but we also know the recipes have different throughout the years. The ancient Israelites were probably using dates, as became a Sephardic tradition. Whereas in the Ashkenazic world in America, it's more traditional to use like walnuts and apples. And maybe both places used honey, but molasses may be indigenous to certain places. So for instance, when we come to our Seder here at Mikveh Israel, Brian, our chef, uses a recipe that was given by the wife of Rabbi Belzer, which is using dates. So it's a little sweeter, where a lot of people will use apples. And what will they use for the sugar? Manischewitz wine, because there's so much sugar in there, they'll use Manischewitz and apples and maybe some type of nut like a walnut. And that's what has become one of the traditional. What type of harosets are you guys used to using at your homes?
The Orleans.
What, Arlene, do you make yours with apples or do you make it with dates?
I think it was apples.
Apples, yeah.
We use apples too.
You even use
Okay.
apples, okay. So apples obviously are the most popular, but we know apples are not indigenous to Israel or that part of the world. Apples really became popular much later on, as we see with the most famous apple. What's the most famous apple that really wasn't an apple? The apple eaten by Adam and Eve, which wasn't an apple, it was a fruit. Maybe not a date. What's the other one? It was, what do you call fig? Probably more of a fig. So different traditions lead us to celebrate in different ways, even with harotzes. Now, if you're not from Eastern Europe, you're probably not going to have a gefilte fish, because that was not part of your world if you're Sephardic. But matzo ball soup has really become something that's been popular in a lot of different areas. How do I know? Because like my second or third year here, our Passover Seder had gotten so big, we were going to have almost 200 people, that we decided we couldn't do soup. We couldn't do matzo ball soup because getting the ladles and the soup for 200 people, because that's more than capacity. And of course, everybody remembered, and the one thing everybody said when we reviewed what we did was, you didn't have matzo ball soup. So it's become so ingrained in us that we have to have it. And that's incredible. Now, afikomen is a ancient tradition going back 2,000 years, but we know it doesn't go back probably farther than that because afikomen is not a Hebrew word. It is a Greek word. So we probably didn't use the afikomen until after we came into contact with the Greeks, which is 4th century BCE at the earliest, late 4th century. So that would be considered an ancient tradition, but we know they weren't doing it. Now we also know that for Christians, it can be a very big deal because many believe the Last Supper for Jesus was a Seder, which is a very legitimate belief, and it was a good chance that they were doing, or maybe a pre-Seder. So the Seder is an ancient tradition, and that has become the most popular reason Passover is so famous. So for Seder, it has become an ingenious way to celebrate the holiday, unlike any of the other traditions. Because the Seder is a holiday in which you're supposed to spend time at home, eating a very specific meal the first night. It's not about going to services. It's about sitting at a meal at home. And that's why I think it's become so popular, because we can use our ancient traditions, eating harosets, eating matzah, eating gefilte fish, a more recent one, whatever you have for dinner. Some people chicken, fish, meat. And then we combine our personal family traditions. Who's invited, who's cooking what, where it's going to be. Those have all become family traditions for us that are often passed down through the generations. Just like the recipe for harosets is passed through the generations. So when we do Passover, it's in many ways like a Thanksgiving. The family, sometimes the extended family, will come together and we will have whatever traditions our families used to. I know families who took the ancient tradition of making gefilte fish very seriously, and they'd start way ahead of time, days earlier, and they use hand cranks. And I know people who took the jar of gefilte fish, did something to it, put it in the toaster oven, and it comes out extra delicious. And that was their tradition. Has anybody ever seen, I think it was a Hadassah video that was made about the 3 generations of making gefilte fish? It's a fabulous short video. I haven't seen it in years. And it shows a grandmother, a mother, and a daughter making gefilte fish. And the grandmother uses a hand crank, and she cranks all the fish, and she starts several days earlier. And she shows all the traditions of mixing it. Maybe even the fish was in the bathtub, and the house smells like fish for the next 6 months. And the kitchen's a mess because there's everything everywhere. It takes her several days. And then the daughter makes her gefilte fish, but she's using like a blender. And instead of chopping, some things come pre-chopped. And it's a lot easier, but still a lot of work. And then the granddaughter, what does she do to make her gefilte fish? She takes out a carrot. She cuts a tiny piece of carrot. She opens the jar, puts the gefilte fish on the plate, and puts the carrot on the gefilte fish. And that's how she makes gefilte fish. And that was the 3 generations of one family making gefilte fish. So it was a very cute video. I don't know if they show it anymore, but I remember seeing it. But it's about the family traditions being passed down. Who is going to lead the Seder? I know in a lot of families, it's a big deal when whoever's been leading the Seder for a long time retires and lets his or her son or daughter lead it from now on. Who is reading the 4 questions? It's a real honor for the youngest, but the youngest reading it for a long time, perhaps. If you're the very youngest, like I would be the youngest, but then I have a brother 2 years younger than me, so he would be reading it for years, but I would only do it for a couple of years. But then when you have kids and you have the next generation, the youngest person now will give over the duties to whoever the children are. So that's an incredible transition to be able to pass it down. Some share stories of where their ancestors came for, how they were celebrating it when they were younger. So for me, I would talk about celebrating with my grandparents in my small hometown and who would come there. And so you would share your own stories with everyone. In some places, they have different games. We know the games that are played for Seder General, but others have different games because they're used to it. One family used to have all the people from the youngest generation would enact a play, an original play for it. In others, you use some of the older traditions like sitting on a pillow, which we know goes back 2,000 years to mimicking what the Romans did. You relax during the Seder. We know in some traditions that you have to pour wine for somebody else so that they are being served, because all royalty got served and everybody's royal on Passover. And then you have some funny traditions, like in other cultures where you had in Persia, they would take the long scallions and they hit each other on the back to remind about whipping. And some, they would actually pour water in the house like it was the division of the Red Sea. And others, they would make everybody would bring their clothes and put it in a backpack or a bag. And then you'd leave the house pretending you were actually leaving Egypt. I don't know that many people, though, that actually killed animals and put blood on the doorposts. I don't remember that as being a tradition popular, but it was something they did thousands of years ago. So it is a combination of family traditions, traditions going back in our particular Jewish background, Sephardic, Ashkenazic, Yemenite, Persian, and traditions going back thousands of years all the way to the Bible and to the Mishnah. Because the Mishnah and the Talmud have a lot of detail as to what Passover is, what are the Passover traditions, which is great because it gives us a lot of clues. Now, as for keeping Passover, we know there are different traditions about cleaning the house. You're supposed to clean the house, get the chametz, use a feather to clean the last parts of it. Maybe it's children, you light it on fire. In some households, it was tradition to get rid of all the food. You gave it away to charity. In others, you would give it to a non-Jewish neighbor, and they would buy it for you for $1, and you would buy it back for $1, kind of symbolically getting rid of your chametz. And other people, they would just lock the door or close the door to where all the chametz is because it was a lot. And this leads to a lot of questions about kashrut. For instance, if you have a restaurant, what do? You have 2 options. You can clean out the restaurant completely, bring in all new cutlery and all new dishes, or you close the restaurant down for Passover, which is what everybody does. And then you symbolically sell your restaurant for $1 and you pay back $1 to get it back to somebody who's not Jewish, which is far more popular and a lot easier. Eva.
In a modern Israel, people are just going to a hotel and they
Yeah.
stay in a hotel instead of cleaning and putting and taking and whatever. They just go to the hotel.
And a lot of people do that, or they go on vacation. And
Mhm.
all you do is close your house and you don't really sell your house, but you sell it for $1, So you can do all these technical things depending on how you want to do it. Now, as for keeping Passover, as we know, there is a plethora of different viewpoints. In fact, our congregation is a perfect example because we're one of the few congregations in history that was founded both as an Ashkenazic and Sephardic synagogue. And I'm sorry, I think somebody was coming in and I didn't see you, so I'm trying to let you admit. There you go. I thought I admitted you. I apologize. So some of us can see how difficult it is to start a congregation with Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews, because we know from the writings of the Presbyterians who were here, that's the Church of England, the Anglicans, that the Jews were always arguing over what to eat. So it seems very likely that there was a difference of opinion on how to do Passover. Why is there different opinion? And this goes back to what we've talking about before. You have to look at the history of the two major groups, the Sephardic and Ashkenazic, and the Yemenite, and really all the other groups in the Ashkenazic. So in the Sephardic world, they were living in the world. The Sephardic world, Spain, Portugal, they lived next to their Muslim brethren. So they were all in the world. They hung out with everybody. They were doctors, they were lawyers, they were nurses, they were writers and poets, and they worked for the kings and they were business people. So they had a lot to do. I mean, they were living their life and they were Jewish. In most of our ancestors' lives, they were living in shtetls or ghettos in Eastern Europe, and they were very limited to their access to the outside world. So what did they study all the time? Jewish stuff. All they did was study the Jewish stuff, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Midrash. That's all they did. And so they had all this time and they had to use their minds. So what did they do? They created a lot of Jewish laws, lots and lots and lots of extra Jewish laws, lots of them. I mean, lots, like so many. And when you're coming to Passover, they created a lot of extra rules for food that many of us still keep using various logical ideas. Corn is in the storeroom next to wheat. Maybe some wheat gets in the corn or vice versa, so corn cannot be eaten for Passover, which we know from the Bible has no biblical connection because it doesn't say in the Bible you can't have corn on Passover. And the same for other things, soybeans. Or you say some things can be made into something that looks like bread. Like I can make corn into cornbread. And so all of these extra things, legumes, nuts, corn, were left out so that they were prohibited, rice, and so soy. And so when it comes to keeping Passover, it is a very, very strict series of rules. Whereas in the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic, where they're living the world, they keep the don't eat bread. I mean, that's the main, let's not eat bread, guys. We're going to eat matzah. And the Sephardic Ashkenazic world, well, we have to have matzah. It has to take, you put in water, you got 18 minutes. If it takes more than 18 minutes and it means it starts to rise, that can't be kosher for Passover. And the Sephardic are a lot less strict. Now, another interesting development further separated these two cultures when it came to Passover, and that was the liberal movements. So when people in the 19th century started saying, I can live in America or Europe, be Jewish, and be part of the society, I want to bring some of my viewpoints into Judaism. I want to be more liberal in the way I look at the world. And so you see in the Ashkenazic world, you see the Orthodox movement develop, the Reform movement, the Reconstructionist, the Conservative, the Renewal, Humanistic. You see all these movements. And the more traditional you are, the Orthodox, you want to separate yourself more. So you have all these rules to make sure you are separated from the more liberal Jews. It's understandable. You want to keep your way of life. What did we never see in the Sephardic movement, in the Sephardic world? There was never a reform or conservative movement in the Sephardic world. There's just one. It's not even Orthodox, you're just Sephardic. And because there's no competition, they don't have to make up all these rules to separate. So in general, Sephardic laws are much more liberal in every area because there's no competition. And so in the Ashkenazic world, there's a lot of debate as to foods. And I think we talked about this before, but my favorite debate in recent times, now, as we know, as time goes on, different foods become more popular. Think of meat. In America, what is the number one red meat that is eaten by far?
Steak or hamburger.
It's beef. That's right. It's beef. A hamburger is probably the number one way to eat beef. Number two would be pork, which, can't be kosher anyway. And then we've got chicken, would be number one non-meat. And then there's a lot of fish eating in America. But in certain places, that wasn't the case. In the Middle East, they ate lamb. In Eastern Europe, meat was very hard to come by unless you were wealthy. So the meats we eat, or whatever the main dish, is very different in a lot of places. The spices are different. The way it's prepared is different. And so we see the same thing for Passover, that it also brings in your traditions. So in the Ashkenazic world, it's going to be very specific because you have to keep the kinyot, which is the extra things, out. When in the Sephardic world, you don't. So that's why so many Jews say, I'm Sephardic during Passover, because we want to have access to these other foods. For instance, I may be 1/4 Sephardic, but I keep the rules a little bit stricter because, especially when I was earlier, when I had a lot of stomach issues, sushi was my number one meal. That's what I ate all the time. Sushi, rice, and soy sauce. So if I'm Sephardic, Passover will have no difference to me at all because I can have sushi every day. But if you're Ashkenazic, what can you not have? You can't have soybean and you can't have rice. So I've decided I don't eat sushi. I don't eat rice and soy sauce during Passover to make it, something more difficult for me to do. So even things like this. Now, a recent food that became popular was quinoa. And as we know, there's a lot of debates on everything and a lot of debate as to whether quinoa was kosher for Passover because it's sort of a grain, but it's not one of the major grains. So does anybody know what the official decision was generally on quinoa? It is officially generally kosher for Passover. Yeah. And it only took like 10 years to make this decision. But in most places, you can eat quinoa. So for those of us who like quinoa, which I don't mind eating because it's tasteless, you can make it taste like anything. It is kosher for Passover, which is really, I think, a great discussion to have because it gives us all these discussions. Any thoughts on Passover? What have we said already? All right, now, a couple other things about Passover. Remember, only 2 times a year traditionally do you give a sermon. The sermon as a Shabbat tradition only came about in the 20th century, really, and in the 19th century in the liberal world. But traditionally, give a sermon on the Shabbat in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Shabbat Shuvah, and you gave a sermon on the Shabbat before Passover. But that sermon was about don't forget to keep the Passover rules. So now we've talked about some of the technical aspects of Passover. Let's talk about the meaning. Because unfortunately, Passover always has meaning. Why do I say unfortunately? Because it's the holiday of freedom. And we always pray that we won't need it anymore. But unfortunately, there's always issues in the world. And one of the ways to bring Passover into the vernacular is talk about the problems. In the 1930s, we would have talked about our Jewish brethren suffering in Europe. In the 1940s, we would have talked about World War II. In the 1960s, we would have talked about civil rights during Passover. In the 1970s, it would have been rights for women. The 1980s, it would have been probably gay rights or the Russian refuseniks. So many people in the Soviet Union who were Jewish couldn't practice, and that became very popular. And it could have been South Africa in the 80s or 90s. Today, when we talk about Passover, we can talk about Iran. We can talk about North Korea or the Palestinian territories. We can talk about Sudan. We can talk about, obviously, countries in West Africa. We can talk about Venezuela. There's a lot of different places where people are suffering and have restrictions. And it's really important for Passover to talk about the issues of the day. Because as we know, there are always people who are suffering and always people who have less freedom. What would be some of the people we might talk about today for our Seders? All right. Everybody's free in the world today. Fantastic. Yes, we've done it. We have made peace on earth.
Well,
So there's a lot of debates. Now, in other ways, we've also tried to add traditions to the Seder plate. It began, of course, with various things, but one thing that has become very popular is Miriam's cup. We know Miriam was a leader in the Passover story, but really she has a very small part in the Torah, very few speaking lines. So we put a cup to remember the women who may not have always had their voice heard. The other most famous addition, of course, is the orange, which has that famous urban legend of a story that, what's the urban legend? That somebody went up to talking to somebody about a woman being a rabbi. The day a woman is a rabbi is the day an orange is on the Seder plate. And so that became the tradition. However, that is completely a myth. That story is completely untrue. It became so popular that everybody thought it was true in the Jewish world, including me. It was just, the real story is somebody went up to a fairly famous woman rabbi, and it was a group of from the gay community. And they said, we want to put bread on our plate, during Passover to remember those who are LGBTQ and have been ostracized. And the rabbi says it's a wonderful thought, but you shouldn't use bread because bread actually breaks the Passover rules. You should use something else that doesn't. And they chose an orange because obviously fruit is allowed. And so an orange has become a symbol of LGBTQ rights for a Seder. Other people add different things depending of what they are thinking about in the moment. And that's really going to be up to you guys. Now, one of the other favorite things is to tell family stories during Passover because you can share stories. That's one of the reasons in the Seder, we don't really talk about the story of Passover. In Moses, we talk about games and ways to make the Seder interesting to other people. So telling family stories is always a great way to share our heritage because we know that the older you are, the more connection you have to distant relatives who may no longer be with us and whom younger generations may have only met as children or never known at all. Ron.
Yeah. On the gay community, when they put an orange on the Seder plate, did they use that to replace something else, or it was just an added?
Very good question. They did not replace anything else. It was just added. Now, there are some Seder plates that will actually have the orange on it, but in most, you just put it on there because there's plenty of room. That's a great question. Now, the Seder plate itself is very interesting because you have foods like the egg, but there's no prayer to eat the egg. There's no moment in the Seder where it says eat the egg. You can eat it after you've said the prayers for anything else. Now, probably the most fascinating part of the liturgy for Seder is the food prayers. Because generally speaking, you say one prayer for a meal. If there's bread, you say motzi. If you're having an apple, you say the prayer for fruit of the tree. If you have a potato, the prayer for fruit of the ground. If you have a steak, you say the prayer for stuff, you say the general prayer, the non-bread. But if you have bread, you only need to say the prayer for bread. You only need to say one prayer for a meal. It's whatever the centerpiece of the meal is. But for Passover, you say several. You say the prayer for the ground. You say the prayer for trees of the tree for fruit of the trees. You say the prayer for matzah, and you say the prayer for bread. So it's a very rare ceremony. Now you do say the prayer for matzah and the bread last, because if you said those prayers first, you wouldn't have to say the prayer for the tree or the ground. So it's very interesting how they line it up so you say more prayers. But it is about freedom, and it's about the idea that our ancestors were helped and that it remains one of the all-time most famous freedom stories in the history of the world. And so it still gets us every year as we realize what slavery really means and what a terrible, terrible life it is. Now, some people keep very strict kosher for Passover and they'll keep every rule. And some people will just eat matzah instead of bread, and some people don't keep it at all, but it's really going to be up to you and how you do it. Some people are stricter on Passover than they are for the rest of the year. Michael.
Question. You say motzi after you've had the moror and charoset, but you don't say a bracha before you eat the moror or the charoset.
Right.
You read a passage.
Right. So you do say the bracha, you say motzi. There's not a special one for it. Yeah. So you're right. So there are certain prayers, like you could add another prayer for that, but the problem is you eat the maror and the harosets with the matzah in the sandwich. So since you're eating the bread, the matzah, you have to say the prayer over the bread for it. So if you ate the maror beforehand, then it would be fine. But also the harosets is usually covered by the previous two prayers for fruit of the tree and fruit of the ground, and so is the maror. So they're generally covered already for those prayers, but you could eat them at the same time.
But that's an hour earlier. You forgot.
Yeah, exactly. But because you're going to eat it with the matzah, you got to say the prayer for the matzah and the bread before you eat it. Really, you could eat the harosets and maror anytime after you've said those other two. It doesn't matter what you put in it.
Gotcha.
So it's there's all these technical aspects to it that make it more fun. And some seders, as we know, last, it's famous. They had the famous 30-minute seder because you can get through all the liturgy really fast if you just do that and don't do all the extra stuff. Or it can be 4 or 5 hours, as we know some people take for the seder. They read everything in Hebrew and English. They have lots of discussions. They take breaks. They have desserts. They look for the afikomen, give the presents to the kids. Now, what is some traditions that have been interesting is the afikomen, the search for the afikomen. The kids get to search. And it became in some cultures that when the kid brought the afikomen, you negotiate and you give them some coins or money. However, for people who are more traditional, you're not allowed to give money during this. You're not allowed to hold money during a seder. So you had to do something else. You either give it to them later or give them chocolate instead. So having chocolate coins is probably fine because that's not considered money. But you're not supposed to actually give money. I know when I was the rabbi in Lake Tahoe for 2 years, I'd go every other weekend. They had their big seder at the casino for the community. And what did they give out to all the kids? Dollar coins. Because it was a casino, they had them. It was just, so that's what they gave to all the kids. So, we give toys to all the kids here, generally speaking. So now, if you don't have a kid, then you don't really need to look for the afikomen. But we've also added other things. We add the appearance of Elijah, which brings more history into it, because Elijah, of course, a prophet, 8th century, I believe, who does not die. He's one of the 2 people in the Bible that doesn't die. He goes up to heaven. God takes him up to heaven. And so now he becomes the herald of the Messiah. So he visits everybody's home, akin to Santa Claus, although he predates Santa Claus. And that has become a big tradition to open the door for him and have a glass just for Elijah. That's why we had the Miriam's glass, to have one for her. But that is specifically for women's rights. Elijah is a character from the Bible. So Passover is supposed to also be joyous. It is a ironic or catch-22 or dualistic holiday, because you're supposed to think about freedom, but you're also supposed to celebrate your life. It's like celebrating everything, but let's also worry about all the things at the same time. It's a very Jewish holiday. We're supposed to celebrate and worry. It's like every day of my life with my kids.
It's every day of life for all of us.
Exactly. It is the holiday where we should be passing Xanax out to everybody, right? Let's not worry. Don't worry, be happy. We played Don't Worry, Be Happy. I don't remember who sang that song, but I remember it was very big. And so it's a difficult one, because as Jews, we're supposed to appreciate our lives, but we're also supposed to think about all the issues out there, which is can bring in a lot of therapist visits. So that's a little bit about Passover. The meaning is so important, as is everything else, but we can talk about also the Midrash, the Mishnah, and the Talmud later. But I want to make sure everybody had a little bit of ideas to remind ourselves to clean our house to the way we want it. Now, when I was single, the good old days, and I lived alone, cleaning for Passover was easy. I cleaned my house. And I remember the one time my first Passover with my wife, and she's like, "Oh my God, we forgot to clean the house out of food." So I hadn't thrown away all my chametz. So I went to my freezer and I took my package of vegan mac and cheese. I threw it away and then I cleaned the refrigerator and freezer because that's the only food I had in my entire house was one microwave dinner vegan mac and cheese. So it was easy to get rid of my chametz because that's all I had just to take it. So, but in other ways, it's a very difficult one. So I want to wish everybody all their best. Passover is coming up in just 2 weeks. Hard to believe. So everybody, I hope you enjoy keeping it to the level you want. Make sure to get your Passover foods. Actually, the Passover chocolates and desserts have become really tasty. Like some of those
I agree.
Passover chocolate cakes, fudge cakes are amazing.
Yes.
When I grew up, the only dessert you got were those little jellies. Remember?
Yeah.
Or like that Passover coffee cake thing.
You didn't get
which-
macaroons?
Oh,
You
you're
didn't
right.
get
And
the
macaroons.
Manischewitz
Macaroons. Thank you, Michael. And macaroons. But they didn't have the various kinds like chocolate covered. And I can't eat macaroons. So yeah, we just had those little jelly things, which
Yeah, those were awful.
I think I still see them once in a while, but my favorite is the chocolate covered marshmallows.
Oh,
Those
yeah.
are delicious. The problem is 60% of the time when you open the package, they're bad. Like they've gone bad for some reason. I think it's because they ship they reship it back. If they didn't sell it, they ship it again. So you got to check the dates. Because it's really 62% of the time. I used to eat them all the time and they're disgusting. But when they're not disgusting, they're really delicious. So just to let you know. All right.
You're not forgotten about that stuff.
Yeah, it's so good though. When they're good, they're great. Now, what we also have to worry about, and it's not intentional, is when you go to the store, whichever one has the most Passover in Savannah, it's the big Kroger's a mall or a little bit of the Publix. I know in Bluffton, what's the name of the place where they have some of the kosher stuff?
The Food Lion. But
Food
it's
Lion,
really hard
Food
to
Lion.
Get, it's really hard to get stuff in Bluffton.
Yeah, it is hard to get it everywhere.
Very,
a lot of
very
people do it
difficult.
online now. You ship it in, but you always have to check because they will take Jewish food and put it in the kosher,
Yes.
not out of malice, out of
Yes.
ignorance.
Yes.
And even matzah, they'll put matzah because it's matzah. It's so obvious.
Yeah.
But not all matzah is kosher for Passover. You
Right,
can eat
right.
matzah any time of the year. I have no idea why you would eat matzah any time of the year. But there's non-kosher for Passover matzah that's actually kosher
Absolutely.
and that they mix in. So you just have to always double check. So I hope everyone has a wonderful Passover, whether you have one Seder, two Seders, or no Seders, whether you're coming here. But of course, if you are coming here for any of the Seders, please RSVP, especially for the first and second night. It is a deal. Most places charge like $200 for a Seder, and that is not exaggeration. We don't make any money on the Seder. We charge what it costs Brian to make it all because it's expensive because you have to get all the extra foods and stuff and all that. So, but it's really reasonably priced for us. So, and I hope everybody does have a good one. Remember, next Wednesday, we're going to be online and we're going to be at Flossie's house. And then May 4th, it's May 4th, right, Lou?
I'm looking at I think it's the 6th. Let me look.
Oh, good. May 6th, not the holiday of May 4th. If it was May 4th, you know how I'd be dressed. I'd be dressed as a Jedi.
Right, no, I'm
But
sorry,
May
it's
6th.
26th, yeah.
May 6th. I said May 4th at the beginning, but it's May 6th. It'll be at Lou's house, and we'll get more information to you. So everybody have a wonderful Passover. Hope everybody had a wonderful St. Patrick's Day. Mikveh Israel was closed for the weekend before St. Patrick's Day because we're the only synagogue in America that celebrates St. Patrick's Day. But hope everybody's doing well, and look forward to seeing everybody later. So I'll say gallery view now, make sure everybody can say goodbye. So thank you to Michael and Lou and Eva and Ron and Arlene and Arnold. And we have somebody else who I don't know who it is, who's on without, thank you to everybody for YouTube for joining us. And we will see you next week on the Wednesday class that shall not be named. So everyone have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Have a good one.
Thank
Bye.
you.
See you Saturday, Rabbi.
I'm out of town Saturday. I'm going to be out of town for a science fiction convention. So I'll be back.